My name is Griselda Pollock. I'm from the University of Leeds, and I'm today in conversation with the sculptor Lorna Green, because we are jointly involved in an extraordinarily interesting new project in collaboration with the Hepworth Wakefield to explore two moments in the history of British sculpture across all of the nations that form the United Kingdom, and particularly because sculpture that has been made by women. So we have a project called Hepworths Progeny. Now, Lorna Green completed a research project at the University of Leeds into women in contemporary sculpture in 1991. Now, given the richness of sculptural practices by women and the changes in society and the condition of women and of art over the last 30 years, we felt that revisiting her original research and then indeed updating it by exploring the whole new generations of sculptors, in fact, two generations between then, we would find something very interesting and fascinating about the continuities and differences in women's creative practice in sculpture itself, and indeed experiences of women. But we'd also probably have some insights into this field of practice, issues of diversity, possibility, and also as ever find out about the persistent inequalities and difficulties created as much as by issues of age or class or ethnicity or even region, as much as of the bald fact of gender. So the project is led through Eleanor Clayton at the Hepworth, with a steering group composed of sculptors and critics. Lorna Green obviously is a critical feature, and there are two researchers who are undertaking both the revisiting of Lorna's original project, looking back at the interviews, the questionnaires that she got, and she'll tell us a bit about that in a minute, and also initiating a new set of research programs. So the title, called Hepworths Progeny, progeny meaning the children of, or the followers, or those who come after Hepworth, is really about the fact that Barbara Hepworth was not the only British sculptor of the 20th century, but she is the most preeminent, the one that's known to people, even if they know not a great deal about art. They have visited her studios in Cornwall, they've probably seen her sculptures outside buildings, whether it's on John Lewis's in Oxford Street in London, or whether it's at the United Nations. But she is, in a sense, a figure of a person dedicated to modern creativity in sculpture. And we wanted to, kind of sense, talk about the women and the generations that came after her, inspired in part by her absolute extraordinary achievement, but also equaling it in their different ways. We wanted that richness of that history. So now I'm going to ask Lorna just to tell us a little bit about her background and how she came to be involved in it, and what, in some sense, you're hoping to come out of it. So Lorna, tell us a little about yourself.
I went to Manchester Polytechnic to study fine art as a mature student. I'd done various things before, and I dabbled as an amateur and, carving then. So I went and did a foundation course at Manchester, which I absolutely adored. And then fine art sculpture as a degree, which was less satisfactory, really, because the climate was not particularly welcoming in what I was thinking. A colleague of mine from there invited me to go to a brickworks where she was having some work cast. And while she was in there talking about the firing, I started to play with the bricks. And this suddenly sparked off a whole new train of thought. When I returned, I thought, I think I need to go and find somewhere to play outside. So I found myself a local quarry. I live in Bramhall, Cheshire, which is near Macclesfield. There are lots of quarries. And I went up there and I said, can I come and play there? And this was probably around 1984-ish. And I found my quarry there, which eventually closed. It turned into a BMX track. So obviously working there, I then was told about the Portland Clifftop Sculpture Park. So I sent photos of what I'd done in the brickworks and my works in the quarry, all temporary, down to Jonathan Phipps, who invited me to go down and make a piece there. So that's what I did. And I made a very big piece. It was called From the Ruins, and it was using the ruins of a sculpture made 2 years ago. And it was there that I looked around and thought, this is quite interesting. There are all these women making these huge sculptures. And it occurred to me that there were probably about 50% of women and men. So I was mulling about this. When you're moving a load of stone and with a wheelbarrow, you've got time to think about things. On returning, I started to look into this. This was in 1985. And I started to do quite a lot of research on my own, looking into exhibitions, and I still had use of what is now Manchester Met Uni Library. Managed to hold on to that service forever. And after about a year, actually it was 86 when I approached Griselda, I applied then to do some research. And fortunately, Griselda took me on, I think with some trepidation, but it paid off eventually. And it took me 5 years.
And of course, when you did come to Leeds, being a feminist art historian dedicated to acknowledgement and recognition and research into the history of women's creativity and their experience and contribution, I was delighted to foster this. I just want to tell you a little bit more about how you went about setting up research and getting access to women sculptors, because there was no social media, right? There was no online platforms. This was a completely pre-digital research project. So tell us a little bit about your process. How did you find your respondents and how did this whole work?
I approached Artist Newsletter, AM, which was the Bible in those days, the absolute Bible. Sue Jones and Richard Padwick set this up in their dining room. And I was there and quite involved with them at the beginning. And it really was the Artist Bible. Everybody took AM and we waited for it. It was a paper version then, which I actually still miss. I did like to have them to read on trains. So I had editorial in there asking for sculptors to contact me. This was a bit before the days of GDPR. I also wrote to the Arts Council England, was then North West Arts, South West Arts, Wales, Scottish Arts Council, Northern Ireland. I wrote to all the arts councils, wrote, not emailed, and asked them to send me lists, which they did. I also wrote to places like the Icon, the major galleries, Tate, all the major galleries, Rochdale, that was quite, Jill Morgan there, she was quite very influential in women's art and feminist art. So I wrote to everybody and I gradually collated lists of women sculptors. And that's how it all started.
Right, so letters and things. And then, of course, you formulated a questionnaire.
Yes.
And received how many responses to your questionnaire?
Well, this questionnaire, I worked out the questions and I actually sent the questionnaire to Sue and Richard to have a look at. And they came back with a very, very constructive letter, which you and I, Griselda, worked on from this, and we got it. We broke my questions from 26 down to 19, and we put it into 3 sections. So it was really quite a joint effort between us all. This questionnaire covered 4 sides, 2 sheets of A4 and a letter. And I sent this out to over 400 women with a stamped addressed envelope. And I had virtually, including the phone calls in the middle of the night, and the letters, and the photographs, and then more phone calls in the middle of the night, I had around 300 responses.
Which is a remarkable indication of how interested women were to talk about their practice and also their experience, because you were looking at both histories of how they came to be sculptors and what they made and how they understood being sculptors, but also what are the life worlds that they were living through. What were the key, can you say what were the key findings? And what did anything really, really surprise you when you analyzed this huge body of data that you'd created?
The oldest person who responded was born in 1905, and the youngest was born in 1961, and there was everything in between. So that age range was very interesting. Most of the people who responded had not had very good experiences at art school, pretty much like mine. They complained about the lack of female lecturers, and pretty similar to mine. But the general consensus was to have had an education, the freedom of 4 or the foundation, 3 years of BA, and possibly an MA further on, was very, very valuable. To do it as the ones who did it on their own through night school had more struggles than the ones that had
A formal art education.
been through formal art training. The other thing that surprised me was that if a relationship was rocky, it was rocky at all, by the time it had been through the art education, it was probably over. It had to be a very solid relationship to survive the years of art school, because it does change. A formal art education changes you massively, the way you think and react and analyze. So that was a surprise.
So why do you think we should revisit this research now and do a kind of do it again for this generation since the 1960s?
I think that those born in 1961 are now, in a way, the older generation, and that all those born since then who have grown up, with technology, with the internet, they have a different perspective. They didn't do all this on an Amstrad. We've now got all this technology at our fingertips, and obviously this has all influenced how not just women but men too think and work. It is a new world, I think. It's very important, the hands-on too, but I think exploring the new world and this freedom that the new generation born 1961 onwards will be thinking completely differently.
Mm-hmm. So many major issues have occurred in the world, so many life transforming conditions, as you say, the digital, the technological, communications, migration, internationalization. There's so many different elements that have come into play that have affected art making, as well as our very sort of even the kind of way we are, and as you mentioned, but do you think the situation for women, do you anticipate finding women having some of the same issues or having very different issues at the level of being women making sculpture in the world today?
I think the situation now in a way is harder because their students, they have to pay. They don't get a grant for materials. I went as a mature student and I had my fees paid, and I also got a £300 a year grant to buy materials. I mean, that doesn't happen now. They have to pay the £9,000. And I think the studio spaces, from what I gather, are smaller and that they have to supply their own materials. I think it's a very, very different world.
I wonder what you could say anything about your own sense of women and sculpture and this sense of being part of the world as a way of speaking to our new concerns about the security and continuity of our planet's worldliness.
I did find women were creating their own language. Once sculpture came off the plinth, that freed women up enormously to more or less take it into their own hands. So they started setting up their own projects. Also, with the rise of sculpture parks and outdoor events and the move to move sculpture out of the gallery, that gave women a lot of freedom. It also gave them a lot of freedom to use non-traditional materials. And now, of course, it's gone into even more into digital and technology and using other materials, but often combined with normal standard materials.
It probably will, very much so. So we'll get a certain kind of picture of the sculptural world as far as it's perceived by women of all kinds of groups and cultures and backgrounds and ages and classes and experiences. We'll get a picture from this because we want very much to draw attention to this fact that this is a completely national and inclusive project. And so we will be soliciting responses from people, the different kind of way of mounting questions based on the kind of questionnaire that you asked at the beginning in the 1980s. There will be a new one. We've got two brilliant researchers, Anna Douglas and Kerry Harker, working with us in a very wonderful, rich advisory panel to ensure that we really get something from this, but hopefully, and it will continue because it's potentially a very, very big project, but it certainly is different. And so the point that I think you're making is that this research will find out a lot about the lived experience and the creative responses of women in all that diversity.